Hello and welcome to a special edition of the LLG blog, where I'm joined by Philip McCourt, who's the legal director at Bevan Brittan, and of course one of our valued corporate partners. I'll get my words out in a minute. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you, and excuse me, we are all but sheep after all. Nothing like a nice pint of tea. So thank you very much for this.
No problem. Libation's very important because I know you're about to talk probably at length. So
wow.
Very interesting matters. So we could literally talk about so much in the sector. There's a lot going on. The thing I think that's on most people's minds, or a lot of people's minds, is local government reorganisation. Now, I know you were at the ADSO conference recently. I was meant to be there and I couldn't, so I'm sorry I missed you. Our president, Paul Turner, was there. He was on a panel talking about the very issue, but you gave a presentation, didn't you, while you were there? What were you flagging?
Yes, and I also listened to Paul with great interest. What he said was really landed, and of course his dry sense of humour. I love that. You know, people say, "Are they joking? Are they not?" It's you know, he always says such lovely, witty things.
He does.
And there was politicians on his panel as well, so that made it a little bit more interesting. And I tried to keep my mouth shut, but I did ask a question at the end about standards and conduct, which I know we're coming back to.
Hopefully, yes.
So we did a presentation. My stuff was some of the tips and tricks that we've picked up in supporting councils through LGR, and we've done that, you know, with several councils now. Especially those looking at employment issues. We go back a long way with our folks advising on LGR and moving companies around and staff and contracts and all that kind of stuff. So I could cover that, but the real reason for that talk was to hear from colleagues in Cumberland and Westmoreland and Furness, because Westmoreland and Furness and Cumberland, of course, have come out of what was Cumbria County Council and that reorganisation, and that one matters, and it matters for a very particular reason, because of course we've had a few goes at LGR over the last 25 years. That first round since 1997, that the government has tinkered with various ways to bring it all into being. And so of the recent ones we've had, for example, Devon, which went straight into the new authorities from their old ones. You know, so there was nothing between them and vesting day. And for those of you going through this, those two words will be tattooed on the inside of your foreheads with sort of burning flame by the end of all of this. You'll be waking up screaming vesting day in your sleep. People, your partners will be going, "What on earth?" So they went straight into it, and that's really, really hard. You know, they had to do the day job and have various committees and be ready for that day. The next phase being the Northamptonshire version, which is where shadow authorities were set up, but the membership of those shadow authorities were taken from the existing member core. So each council had an allotted percentage of the cabinet, for example, and put members forward, and that's fine. But of course those members were trying to do different things at the different time with different audiences and had their own axes to grind, as it were, particularly with Northamptonshire having taken ideology over common sense, quite frankly, and bankrupted the council. So that difference with what was Cumbria is that is the model that the government is now going to apply to the next round, this big round of LGR.
And it makes it, I was just going to say, I think obviously it's an improvement to the Devon situation, but managing those political expectations and what they can actually, realising what they can do as a shadow authority, adds a level of complexity, I would submit.
It does, and I think what I actually agree with what works in this model is the very first round of members are elected for 5 years. So year one, they are elected directly onto the shadow authorities for what's coming. And year one is simply about folks who don't have a day role. Your role is to spend this year to prepare for what's coming, to control all of the inputs and outputs, that aggregation, disaggregation, all the rest of it about what's going to come. And the guys who lived through that were the main speakers at the ADSO conference, and of course at yours as well. And it was fascinating because A, because they lived it and can tell it, and B, they survived it and survived
Yes.
it with a smile on their face and jokes to be had and going, look, this was incredibly hard and incredibly difficult, and they're still picking up the pieces, but we're okay. We've made it, and everybody who came with us has made it. There is only one person who is automatically up for redundancy, and that's the chief exec. So everybody else is going to, shift the seats, and whether that's, shifting the seats on a modern cruise liner or the Titanic is a matter of personal choice. But nonetheless, they got there, and they told the story of how they got there. And then my bit was simply because we supported them through that process, helping them put the constitution together, helping them put the inter-authority agreement to try and manage the contracts and services the other side. If we go back to reorganisation of Cheshire, well, the second round of reorganisation in Cheshire, they started with, I think, 37 services just held in a host authority agreement to pull apart. Well, 10 years later, or getting on for 10 years later, they're down to only 2 services now in that agreement. But it took a long time. So that whole process of prioritising what must or mustn't happen and all the rest of it. And of course, Cymru was made extra interesting because the county council said none of this is going to happen. We're going to judicially review the government, and nobody's to play ball. And surprise, surprise, they lost. And so everyone had to do everything at double quick time. So that made it extra hard. But that added an extra nuance to those lessons to be shared with everybody. So I think it was a really well received stuff, and the guys who spoke deserved all of the applause they got.
Excellent. I think it's a really important point you make about realizing that even when you're in the midst of it all, there will be an end to it and it will be okay is kind of a really positive message. But talk to me about community engagement and this. So I was reading earlier, the MJ's constantly got the LGR on its front cover. At the moment, it's covering Surrey, who's ahead of the game a little bit, but it's talking about the Surrey's need to transfer community assets at speed into their districts for the sort of community hubs and buildings and their town halls, etc. Sorry, into their parishes from their districts. So what would you say about transfer of community assets, but also around this issue of parishes in terms of some areas have parishes, don't have parishes, and what that looks like in terms of the government's agenda for engagement?
Well, that's currently, or at least today, it's my favourite subject.
Okay.
Because we're just about to publish an article I've done on it, which has been knocking around. I promised it back in June, but the conversation keeps shifting.
Yeah.
And at some point you had to say, right, okay, this is the point, to collect all of those thoughts together and hone it into an article. So I spent far too much time on it, and I'm sure I'll get into trouble in the usual way. But nonetheless, to me, it was important.
Is it long, Philip? That's what I want to know.
Yes, of course it is. It's far too long. It's an essay, not an article. That's part of the problem. But because there is actually a lot to say on it, because there is a very quiet, or in some places not so quiet, heavy-duty argument going on between government ministers and the councils concerned. On one level, there's a very straight, look, what are we going to do with the mayoralty, and are we going to have charter trustees or not, and what does that mean? Because it will come to an end, us being the civic centre of the universe. Each of the boroughs, and in some cases cities, they're used to having, if they have parishes, the parishes are out in the isolated areas, some semi-urban, urban, non-urban, and the centre being the centre. So at best it had a special expenses area in lieu of a parish precept that the principal council managed usually by an area committee. So moving from that to suddenly not being the centre of the universe is quite a difficult mental shift to do. And what we've seen is people have said, well, hang on, so there's that. We need something preserved for our town, or in many cases a city. So we need to have an element of preservation of that. We need to structure around that. There is also the representation of us as a geographical, commercial, centre, travel to work area, all of that kind of stuff. And then there's the overall democratic deficit. So what is being created, and I know the government has softened on this, but we started with the nominal figure is 500,000 people.
Yeah,
now,
it's large.
Just to put that into perspective, the entire nation and country of Iceland would be too small to qualify as a council in England. Put it like that, it sounds daft. So there is a natural, this is too big, too distant, too remote. How does it work for us? I still remember meeting people who talk about pre-1974, I can't walk down to the town hall anymore and get everything done by having a chat with the clerk. This is that on a big scale. And there will be a loss of a number of councillors and their representative role if they're ward members, and that community voice. So how does that get filled in? The government's response has softened. So it started off, don't you dare set up town and parish councils because they are unruly, they're independent, and currently their tax raising powers are uncapped. Now the Secretary of State has a reserve power still to apply capping to them, but has not yet been used. So that softened because the likes of NALC and others have gone, hang on a minute, we do exist, we've already got 10,000 councillors, and we do a pretty good job, and they have what they refer to as the super councils. That's those town, parish, we'll just call them local councils, that precept over 1 million or have a budget over 1.5 million. That's not small beer.
No, I think people forget that exists.
Yeah. And so those have, liveried vans, they have a number of staff, they have apply a bit of political muscle, and all of that adds up. So the government softened a bit and said, we'll work alongside the town and parish councils, but please don't create any more. How convincing they've been with their answer, which is neighbourhood governance. Now, I know many colleagues on this call will be used to the last few years. Everyone's been busy getting rid of area committees because area committees and area forums were seen as a way of getting in the way of ward member budgets, and more members wanted to do their own thing. And in the days of austerity, they were seen as just talking shops that didn't achieve anything. So how that will actually land, and of course the government's current answer is, well, we'll make it work, and we're currently doing a survey, outrageously short, it ends next week, to existing town, parish and principal councils to say, how do you do area governance at the moment?
Yeah.
To which a number will reply, we don't do any because it's far too expensive. So, we'll see how that lands. So are they believable? But at the same time, there is that natural fear as well of what's going to happen to our assets? What's going to happen to our town hall?
Yeah.
You know, are those people in the big new ugly council? What are they going to do with our family silver? So there's that natural reaction. But of course, it's worth reminding all of those members that there will be a continuing duty to the area and a fiduciary duty and all of that. So some of that is knee-jerk, and it does have a downside. The government's got a point. I was the monitoring officer for Milton Keynes many years ago. Milton Keynes was the pioneer in all of this. They had a policy that every part of Milton Keynes would be parished. As a result, there were 6, 7 councils that would count as those super councils. There is a city centre town council. So there is a mayor of the town council within a, it's like Russian dolls. And I think there's only 3,000 people live there because it's all shops and posh flats. It's, quite interesting. But of course, what happened there is some councils said, right, okay, well, we're going to have precept. While I was there was one council had a precept rise of 60%, but nobody noticed. Because it's such a small percentage. I know other places have had nigh on 100% increases. And one council had a slush fund that they kept ready to judicially review the city council just in case. And being the monitoring officer on the losing end when they actually put that slush fund to work, because they did JR and they won, very uncomfortable.
I can imagine.
And politically, of course, it's the place where everyone goes who wants to be a city councillor, so they're honing their skills, and people have lost their seats on the city council, so go back and throw bricks at the main council. So in some cases, it was open warfare, practically. There are downsides to all of this, but then that's kind of the point, isn't it? This is about local democracy for local people doing their local thing. Now, scale that up, and what's happening is districts, boroughs are saying, well, our unparished urban centre needs that kind of equal playing field representation. And so that process of community governance reviews at pace is happening. We're supporting some at the moment in terms of process. And, the fresh councils are coming on stream. So North Yorkshire was in the very last round of local government reorganisation. Scarborough Borough Council now has Scarborough Town Council, went live May 25. That'll have an impact. North Northamptonshire was largely parish, but their 3 boroughs had unparished centres. They now have town councils, all of which have a majority party of a different colour to the unitary council. So that's interesting because there's a bit of political, look what we're doing, what are you doing kind of stuff. And then deeply interesting is Northampton. Northampton was by far and away the largest district in the council. Why that was the case and it never became a unitary is a subject for a whole other conversation, and it would make a lovely PhD. But when they went unitary into West Northamptonshire, they created one town council for their unparished core urban area. Now that doesn't sound like much.
It's massive,
actually,
isn't it?
That is 130,000 population it covers. It is now by far and away the largest town council in the country. And scale that up. So I hate to upset anybody, but the likes of the City of Gloucester, City of Norwich, City of Cambridge, none of which are anywhere near the size of Northampton, and so will be subsumed into larger unitaries. And then you go up one more to the medium-sized unitaries that are tagged on and don't, meet that 500,000 kind of question. So the Peterboroughs, Brighton and Hove, and then go up again where the Leicesters and Nottinghams, the core large cities, are still in the conversation. They're in the mix. the invitation on LGR went out to them, if they get subsumed their outlying areas or become subsumed like Northampton did into a much wider unitary council, what will they do? Will they want to be like Sheffield and just have some outlying town and parish councils, but recognise they are like a metropolitan borough and they shouldn't have town and parish councils? Or will they also say our urban core needs that kind of heavyweight representation? Certainly, I would think the Gloucesters of this world would want the equivalent of Northampton. So there will then be a patchwork of very seriously sized local councils within that structure of the large unitary council and then the strategic authority, which, for want of a better phrase, I call, it's like the Urban District Council reinvented, the 1974 Urban District Council. It will come back because those people will take on parks, they will take on facilities, they will be begging for delegation of planning powers and all, anything that the unitary wants to delegate across to a town council, they can. And when they're that size, when the town council is bigger than existing unitaries, why not? And that kind of upsets the whole conversation. That's another reason why the government's nervous, because the whole idea behind unitarisation suddenly gets upset because it shifts everything along and creates then this extra thing. Now, that's not going to affect the little, thingy come what's it parish council of, population 500. They'll still do their thing the way they've always done their thing. But these folk will have some muscle, and they will all be warded, and they will all have political elections. I don't know. When they flex their muscles, what will happen?
Well, it'll be interesting, won't it? I mean, I've seen in Staffordshire, there's different models that are being put forward, one of which is creating a unitary of over 650,000. So, I mean, on that sort of scale, when you look at the geography, but we're just going to have to watch this space. Now, I want to move on and talk to you about the Code of Practice on Good Governance for Local Authority Statutory Officers, because you had a massive role in the production of that guidance.